Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. It is a pleasure to have a true champion of entrepreneurship joining us today, Thom Ruhe, who's been advancing the gospel of building businesses for well over a decade. Places like Jumpstart, Kauffman Foundation, and today is the CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, which I'm excited to share with everybody. So, our second go-around. Great to talk with you, Thom.
Thank you, Mo. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you.
So you kind of spilled the gospel on me just a little while ago. So I thought it might be fun. You live and breathe entrepreneurship, and at a much deeper level, I think, that a lot of people do. You shared with me the challenges that you see in the future. So let's just start off. Tell me what you see as the biggest challenges in the future, just of entrepreneurship in general.
Well, I think it's redefining entrepreneurship as we know it. Historically, it had been so steeped or misclassified as, business management. Entrepreneurship is one of those weird words that has many different meanings and connotations. But as it's evolving now, I really see it's at the nexus of economic development. It's at the nexus of policy change, and it's even at the nexus of educational reform. Namely, infusing, an entrepreneurial mindset at all of these junctures. If you want to, talk about building dynamic, vibrant economies, we have to talk about entrepreneurship and supporting entrepreneurs, at the ecosystem level. If we want to talk about education reform, it's talking about, giving students more of an entrepreneurial mindset so that they graduate with something beyond just massive amounts of debt. It's really something that has to be more mainstream than it has been historically.
Well, what I appreciate so much about the work that you're doing, the work that you've done in the past decade, is that you really focused on making measurable progress. And you've started with grassroots, as you shared with me in Kansas City. But what do you see now in your current capacity? What is it going to take to make measurable impact?
Well, I think one of the things that we're really going to have to figure out is how to scale, effective. There's the MOOCs. The MOOC movement has been, on the periphery and nibbling at the edges. Online education advancements. I don't think these are perfectly suited. There's ways to apply that to help this problem, but it's not perfectly suited because, as you know yourself, based upon your esteemed record in entrepreneurship, this is more of a contact sport. So we still have to figure out how to get that experiential learning component to it. The other thing we have learned, being, in the trenches, so to speak, is that peer-to-peer, learning happens very dynamically and is very well suited for entrepreneurship. It's really helping us challenge this notion of teaching versus learning. And if we're really looking to help people learn entrepreneurship, we have to use more than just MOOCs and online tools. We also have to figure out how to, facilitate materials and resources that are going to help advance that kind of thinking. So I think it's going to be a hybrid approach to how we teach that goes beyond just, the flipped classroom model.
Well, we hear a lot that every one of us has these entrepreneurial traits in us. It just needs to be ignited. But that doesn't make the process easy. Right? So, building a business is just plain difficult. I think you take it from that perspective. It is really hard to get something off the ground. And what we're trying to do, especially at Entrepreneurial Learning Center, is to give you a process that could help improve those odds. It's not easy.
No, it's certainly, and in the process, pedagogy from the teaching side of it is very helpful. And as I'm hearing you talk, I'm reflecting on certain talks I've given in the past. Entrepreneurship, again, one of these fascinating topics that people like to sometimes even, extend to mythological, levels. Like, oh, it's a special DNA. You're some, unicorn out there in the universe. They want that silver bullet, right? Give me that entrepreneurial silver bullet, like how I'm going to be successful doing it. And I think the epiphany I'm coming to very slowly, because I'm not all that smart, is that it's really establishing a framework for understanding the hard work. That's exactly what you just alluded to. It's not easy, right? The secret sauce is that there is no secret sauce. There is no shortcut. It's blocking and tackling how I spend my life. What am I passionate about? People tell me every day I'm passionate about X, Y, and Z. And I sit back skeptically and I say, "Oh, that's great." And then I get challenged on that. "Well, you don't think I am?" And I'm like, "I don't know. Tell me how you spend your day and I'll tell you what you're passionate about." I don't care what your words are. But if you're a young person, let's just use an example that's not in the abstract. If you're a young person, you say, "Hey, I want to live an empowered life, an empowered self-directed life that's predicated upon, entrepreneurial opportunity." That's great. I applaud you. But if you're spending 2 hours a day, you know, playing a video game or on Facebook or texting, or look at all the things that suck time.
That's a job, Tom.
That's exactly right. And you have to have that self-awareness to say, can I truly say, and it doesn't have to be an entrepreneurial thing, right? It could be, I don't know, even a musical instrument or whatever, passion. Can I truly say that's a passion? Or am I deluding myself if I'm not investing the time in whatever that pursuit is? Because that's the priority. We have an entrepreneur in one of our curriculum programs who said this even better than I. He said, if I were to come to your home with a hammer and smash every television in your house, I bet you'd figure out, even if you're poor, I bet you'd figure out a way to replace at least one of those televisions, because that's a priority in your life.
Each
right?
one of us would, absolutely.
What is that priority for you? And if it is entrepreneurship, great, seize it and make it your priority. You can't wish for it, you got to work for it. And that's the secret sauce. There is no magical entrepreneurial bullet out there.
But you've been focused on skills. It seems like from our conversations earlier, you've started to focus on the skills to develop, again, very early on with entrepreneurs. What are some of the more important skills that you think are really necessary today, both for our kids and certainly for the entire generation to thrive in this economy?
Well, one of the things that we have found we needed to do to effectively and in an intellectually honest way teach entrepreneurship is typically you have to do first some myth busting, right? You have to debunk certain thoughts that, like I have to have that $1 million idea, right? Because the problem with that is we start treating ideas like lottery tickets. And if I don't have a lottery ticket, then I can't be a winner, entrepreneurially speaking. So when I look at that we need to do that, that tells me a skill that we need to help teach is critical thinking, or healthy skepticism, if you want to call it that, right? If you've gone through any of the lean, one of the 7 flavors of lean out there, right, methodology, they all say invariably in some different way, but similarly, challenge your assumptions. Because, it's not as much, what we know that gets us in trouble. It's the stuff that we think we know absolutely that's just plain wrong, as Samuel Clemens said better than I many, many years ago. So that's a big one, critical thinking. I don't want to be hyperbolic when I say that another skill, and I'm not sure it's a skill, it's more of a personality trait, but courage. It's really not being afraid to endeavor into the unknown. Maybe that's called a risk for uncertainty or ambiguity, a tolerance for ambiguity. For too many people, the unknown just becomes this insurmountable thing that prevents them from taking any effort whatsoever. I've learned, based on my own entrepreneurial experiences, to actually enjoy those, right? They're not the scary moments anymore. It's this is going to be the adventure where I figure out how in the heck we're going to, teach 10,000 faculty in Cyprus, as we have an opportunity right now. I have no clue how we're going to do that. But that's not going to stop me, right? I'm going to embrace that as a fun opportunity to figure out how we're going to do it. And in so doing, I'm learning more things about our business and our market and how we take care of our clients.
But you have to have a certain mindset for that, Tom. I mean, you got to have some chops for sure, right? But you got to have a certain mindset to enjoy. That's a heck of a lot easier said than done.
It is. Because I was not nearly this confident, in my first startup to, now in my 5th, like we talked about earlier. So that does come with experience, right? Which I think is true of most things in life that we endeavor to learn. And what you also learn that I think is a wonderfully valuable skill as an entrepreneur is empathy. You need to have empathy for, not just your clients in your market, but other people in the ecosystem. I think empathy helps you see holistically the market around you more than people that can be very have a very self-centered perspective on something, because opportunity is all around you. If you have this tunnel vision, you can miss these wonderful opportunities all around you. And I can't even think of any one of my prior companies where we didn't identify another product opportunity or service line that didn't come from that. Where we were engaged with a client for one thing, did a great job doing that, and the client then trusts you. You demonstrate empathy to them. That's the foundation of a trust relationship, in a company. And then they come to you and say, "Hey, help us with this," or "Can you help us with this?" And I know it's kind of cliched to say, problems are opportunities, but they really are, when you're in a startup.
How would you approach your fourth startup differently than your first?
Well, for one thing, I had realistic expectations. Another one, not to be all tongue in cheek on you, but another thing, my the strain on my marriage was a lot less because my wife was better suited to
She's
understand.
experienced, right? She's a veteran.
Yeah, yeah, and the funny story on that one too, on that fourth one, because we started that right after post 9/11, and cash and things like that, and clients were in rare commodity.
Like literally post 9/11. Like we're talking about, the transition started
The
9/10.
day after
Right.
9/12, we
Yeah.
started. And there's no B school in the country you can go to. There is no entrepreneurship course that prepares you for start a business that's in public relations marketing, right? And then, a catastrophic world event of terrorism changes the dynamic of that industry overnight because nobody was advertising, for fear of a whole host of reasons. And so we had to secure a line of credit for that business, to sustain, in addition to, as a principal, even committing my own personal financial resources. So, and in that fourth one, I had already done a PG before, a personal guarantee before, but it's still something that my wife wasn't too thrilled about. So I forgot to tell her that the partners were all signing a personal guarantee. And sure enough, after we did that, I'm an entrepreneur. The next day, it's a new day, so that's already in my rearview mirror. I'm off working and figuring how we're building the company. And when you know it, the bank forgot to get us all to sign one document. So they sent a courier over to the house a week later for a signature. And I get this phone call from my wife, "Did you forget to tell me something?" Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And that was a big difference. My wife and I sat obsessed all night long, didn't sleep. It was a very big thing. By the fourth, you're like, it is what it is. I'm all in as it is. So if this fails, they can come and personally, collect whatever they can. There won't be much left. And of course, I'm happy to report that never became an issue.
But you really didn't have all four advanced, right? So you didn't really experience, what the majority of the people do, which I think there's good and bad to that.
I forget which explorer, did this, but when they got to the shores of where they're going, they metaphorically or literally, burnt their boats, so as to say going back is not an option. That had been kind of my MO in most of mine, so that forces you to, at least if it's not like a huge exit, it does force you to at least to have some sort of pathway to something of value creation. And you're right, I just didn't know any other way. I wish I had a more eloquent answer to that. I just didn't have another way. And that's, in some of the things that we produce and write and talk about, we call that tacit knowledge. These are the kind of things that just come with experience. It comes with just being out there and getting kicked around. And tangentially related to this, and if you let me go back to the other point you had asked about skills, right? Overcoming fear is one of those things. I tell entrepreneurs that come to me and say, got this great idea, and I listen to the idea and I think to myself, wow, that's got great potential. And I ask them, why aren't you doing that? What if I fail? Or what if it doesn't work? I just answer them with the same question. Well, yeah, well, what if you do fail? What's going to happen to you? The sun's going to come up tomorrow. The people that love you today will love you tomorrow, right? Will you maybe lose some of your material things and goods? Who cares? That's not going to affect who you are as a human. That doesn't affect your value system. That doesn't make you a bad person. When you can get this point in your brain or your mindset where that clicks, you realize how much fear just holds you back, and it's really just something that has no value add. You just have to let it go and focus, as I said earlier, on the execution part of it.
Well, I got two epiphanies I want to share with you, and both had, one of them, I'm going to start with this fear thing, had to do with, I was speaking with a group of really successful founders about a week and a half ago, and this issue came up. And maybe because of their upbringing or maybe because of their geography, they're not afraid, right? Fear is not a big deal. And one of the epiphanies that I had, Tom, is that I think you and I, especially now, maybe in our little tiny scope of the world, we really view it that way, that fear is a misstep, fear is learning. We kind of have to fall on our face to get better. But the realization is that the great majority of the world still lives in that fear is bad. And that's a fact.
Mo, you're absolutely right. But here's where, and I'm not trying to be Pollyannish when I say this, but here's been one of the byproducts of the 2008 collapse. If anything that I try to extract positively from that, financial calamity that we suffered is, for so many people that had this false perception that there was this thing called job security, in big companies, unfortunately, so many people lost their livelihood for reasons that they had no responsibility over, for factors completely outside their control. And this notion of I'm afraid to do this, and I have this perception that this thing I have over here is secure, or a security. And it's really, I think it's just conceding self-responsibility to a perceived higher, entity, namely some big company. When you shift that locus of control from external to internal, you realize, well, it's more in my self-interest if I'm responsible for myself. And if I have to bet on my security, whatever we're going to call that, on me versus something big that I'm really just this tiny cog in the wheel of, and factors completely outside of my control affect my livelihood, well, brother, I'm going to bet on me.
No doubt.
Every time.
No
Every
doubt.
time.
But again, for me, that was a real realization, because with so much conviction, I talked to people about that exactly in the same manner as you had. So what? Failure is just, you're not going to get hundreds on every one of your tests. You're not going to get, if you're living in that world, you're really holding yourself back. And then after that session, I realized that's just your world.
Right.
That's not everybody else's world, and it really hit me. So here's the second point that came out of this conversation. These were astute, talented founders. There was a bit of controversy between, okay, we all understand the whole lean methodology, right? That we start small, we do MVPs, we come up with ideas and test and test and test. The other camp comes from, well, hey, I'm in Peter Thiel's camp, where he said, if you're not out to change the world, if you're not out doing something hugely ambitious, don't do it. And I think the contradictory is, Eric's not telling you to not have a big vision. He's saying have that big vision, but take one step. And I think that's interesting, especially with some of the conversations you and I had this morning.
And I would just offer a mediated approach to say, I don't believe in the extremes of anything. I embrace the gray, is what I call it. For Peter, he's building a brand around himself, and, and his success, God love him and congratulate him for it. But it's one vantage point that'll serve some segment of the population. And Eric and, others out there professing the lean methodology, that's another one that'll suit, a certain segment of the population. And the private equity Silicon Valley narrative, plan and pitch, right? That's another sector. It's a smaller sector of the overall startup volume, but it outperforms financially speaking. So it's a great sector we need, but it's a flavor, right? This notion that there can be only one, as the Highlander said, right? There's only one way to define this. That's bunk too.
Absolutely.
I can tell you, I have met people all over the world, literally from Bangladesh to Brazil to Morocco to here in the States, people doing unbelievably entrepreneurial things that would never use that label to even define themselves.
Yeah.
Like don't think of themselves as an entrepreneur, but they're demonstrating that behavior every single day. And so I say, let's not get caught up on that. Let's not have a useless debate. It's similarly, I throw in the exact same cast the debate around, are entrepreneurs born, or can they be taught? What a silly debate. I don't waste time with it anymore. Of course you can be taught. I almost say tongue in cheek that it's a muscle. You have an entrepreneurial muscle. And like a muscle, you just have to exercise it. You got to get it out there, and you have to start building muscle memory so that it starts getting easier over time. And that could be applied in so many different disciplines by so many different people, because, entrepreneurial potential is not limited, as a birthright, or it's not limited to a geography. There are ecosystem things that allow certain geographies and certain birthrights to be disproportionately more successful, but somebody with zero background or exposure, can still succeed if they're exposed to the training, the education, and the mindset. They will eventually do that. And there are examples of that literally from all over the world.
Well, you're living it with the work that you're doing, and I want to make sure everyone knows about it later. But let me ask you a question about this whole notion of value. As consumers today, when we look at, the incredible technology we have, we've become really picky that things have to be absolutely 10 times better in order for us to pay for it. So when you're advising entrepreneurs or mentoring the entrepreneurs that you're mentoring, how are you defining this notion of value? Are you okay with an incremental improvement with value, or are you focused on, hey, if we're not at least 10 times better, we're not going to have a shot?
Here too, I don't get religious. What you might say is a 10x factor of improvement, somebody else in the market might find as negligible, or somebody else might find as 1,000%. We have a curriculum that is actually growing faster outside the U.S. than it is within the U.S. And as we sit back and we look at that and we say, well, why is that, right? It's the same program. Why is that? Well, internally domestically, there are factors about how curriculum has to go through review panels and adoption and the competitive nature, of schools in the U.S. And outside the U.S., there's this notion and perception that entrepreneurship, especially American-style entrepreneurship, if I can use that label, right, is desirous, and so the demand is greater. So it's the same product that comes out. The perception of the value is different. I'm not going to get religious as the proprietor of the product. I'm not going to have that religion. I'm just going to be empathetic to what the perception of both of my markets are, and I will cater to those markets as I need to help them, receive the value from my product. That's what's most important to me.
So as you sit there and you evaluate that with a group, maybe that come to you with an idea or an initial early founding team, do you want specific skill sets with that early group to make sure it gets off the ground? We've heard, I got to have a hustler, I got to have a hacker, I got to have a data analyst. What's your perspective on what that early team looks like?
I don't bet against any model. I would not say, well, you can never do this, because there will be people that will, prove the exception. What I will suggest is I have seen, and in my own experience, diversity on a team to be more beneficial. I don't need 5 like-minded people that are like-skilled because we run the risk of an echo chamber, right? So find people that complement you in ways that, in areas that you're weak, and then, your contribution to the group is where you're strong and you can lead in those capacities. I think that's important. It also helps you see the market with greater accuracy, because everybody brings a different perspective to it. Beyond that, it's more of a, I just shudder to use this word, cultural thing, because I think it's overplayed. That's the only reason why I'm reluctant to say, think about the culture you want in your
It's a trendy
nascent.
topic.
I know, and then that's why I'm a little allergic to it. But there isn't a better word for it. It really is. It's a question of what kind of culture do you want to have, right? I hear people say, "Well, we want to be the Apple of insert industry that they're in here," right?
Well, the
If you
new one,
read,
the new one obviously is Uber. We want to be the Uber
yeah,
of this. Or everybody's got an Uber idea.
yes. Sorry, thank you. I just dated myself. You're right. I want to be the Uber of. Yeah, that's right. And like the last year or two ago was I want to be the B&B, Airbnb of.
Yeah.
And it's great to have kind of gazelles, as your pace that you're going to shoot towards. But I would just question that a little bit more to say, make it what it is that works for you. And if the market is rewarding you by saying, yes, we'll buy that product. Yes, the improvement, incremental or otherwise, is enough. It's adequate, right? Then you will proceed and you'll start building something of value and you'll make it yours. But I think diversity is going to be a big part of that.
Tom, when you and I started our first businesses, I don't want to date ourselves, but the number was still an 8, right?
Hmm?
In those times, obviously there was no access to capital like that is today, right?
Right.
Things have changed. You even then, and even in 2001, you opted to self-fund a lot of your stuff. What's your approach now to capital? How do you advise entrepreneurs about this whole capital thing? Most ideas come to people, and certainly there's fear and internal things that happen, but it's this whole capital issue that holds a lot of people back.
Wow, what a different world we live in today, right? Your kids and mine are called digital natives. We're digital immigrants.
Yeah, we didn't know what that A was, like Brian Gumbel and Katie were talking about, right?
Exactly. I saw that commercial too. We didn't have these resources. My first commercial grade website that was commerce enabled that we built for a client, we charged over $1 million for that site. Wow. Today with $50 on GoDaddy, a 13-year-old kid could do the same with a shopping cart, right? So times have changed, and a couple things have happened because, if you'll forgive the cliche, the world has shrunk, right? And we're more mobile and we have access to greater markets. I had this epiphany real time when I was giving a keynote speech last year. Community has become the new form of currency for me. If you're starting a company and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to have financial needs, you have the luxury now, and there are resources online to find what communities in the country, have some kind of financial aggregation around your industry. So the first thing I would say is go where the money is, right? If I'm going to go fishing, I'm going to go fish where the fish are. And that's not a clarion call to send everybody to the valley. There's lots have been changing everywhere in the space. You can find them everywhere, and virtually. So like the angel lists of the world that exist that are doing a real good job through social proof to help funding sources. But I think the most significant change that's happened that I just couldn't be more thrilled about is crowdfunding. There's this notion that you can raise non-diluting capital. That just is an option we didn't have back in those 80s period. And so you don't have to take no for an answer. And I don't mean to cast aspersions on investors. I'm an investor, so I say this in all earnest. You don't have to take erroneous terms from an investor. If you don't like it, try to go find it in the market in a crowdfunding capacity. That I think has just been exponential. That's like one of those game-changing ones that you can do that. It's not to say it's without risk. I'm not putting this on the pedestal with the invention of penicillin. It's going to be fraught with problems. I did an interview in the Wall Street Journal last year about all this, and I said, we would do well to inoculate society with the expectation that there's going to be fraud and there's going to be problems with it. And newsflash, there was when commercial banking took hold in this country too.
Mm-hmm.
It's inevitable, but the kinks will get worked out. And in the meantime, you're going to have people that could participate in, supporting entrepreneurship that would, heretofore never had that opportunity. It's going to put people into the marketplace as entrepreneurs that heretofore never would have, because they can't find the idea, or the capital to fund the idea.
And that's just in the first inning of an extra inning game. I mean, that whole
Right.
world is going to be absolutely phenomenal. All right, two more quick questions for you. When, for you personally, did you start to see your role as the founder have to change to more the leader, the manager? Because companies and teams need managers, and most of the
Right.
time, it's not always the founder.
Right. Yeah. So we talk about this actively in our current company, and this is the metaphor we use. Right at the beginning, the first hires, including the founding team and the first key staff members, were all Swiss Army knives. And at some point in the evolution of the organization, you start hiring scalpels because you have money now that you can trade for somebody else's time, right? When you're very cash strapped and you're very much at the beginning, you have to be the CEO and chief cook and bottle washer and customer service person and everything. And so you need people that can function on all those levels. The problem with functioning on all those levels is you're really probably not a master of any of them. You're a jack of all trades, master of none. When you get to a higher level of scale and you extract more value from the marketplace in exchange for your product or service, you need to up your game. Ergo, you need now people that are deep but in specific areas. So you go from hiring Swiss Army knives to hiring scalpels. There's a tipping point. I don't know where it is, but it's a tipping point that when scalpels start outnumbering Swiss Army knives, you need managers. You need, I guess let's see if I can torture this metaphor any further and keep with it. You need more skilled surgeons to put, those scalpels in the hands of, and not some field medic that's going to triage, in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. I think I brought that metaphor home.
Did you transition? Was there a point for you, even with the last company, where you said, I'm not the founder doing what founders does anymore. I've got to lead this company if we're going to get to that next level.
Yeah. Yeah. And that happens when you start realizing how much of my time am I spending working in my business versus on my business. And when you find that, you're doing is working in, putting out fires every day. I think for a lot of founders, that's a break point that they get to, and they have to decide, okay, is this what I want? For too many that find themselves at that point, what they realize is they don't own a company, they own a job. And in my experience in mentoring people that get caught in there are the ones that never break out of a company that's little more than a job for them. And it's a job with disproportionate headaches, disproportionate, problems, disproportionate weight that they carry, because they have all that stuff that goes with a business, plus having to do the roles that they do. I've actually been in situations where I've had to advise somebody, I think you should close this. You just need to close it down because you're miserable, you're not healthy, you're not making, increment. You haven't made more money in like 8 years, right? Which means you're losing money to inflation and other things. So hit the reset button if you have to. And that's hard for people to see and to realize. And that comes along the arc, of the growth cycle of the thing that they started.
Brilliant comments on that. That opened my eyes. The last question is, when you look at really high potential leaders and entrepreneurs and founders today, how do you advise them to keep their edge? How do they stay sharp? What do you want them to learn now, say maybe 4 or 5 years into their business?
These really sharp men and women, that are driving and growing really good businesses, I find I don't need to tell them anything. They're self-motivated, right? So let me just tweak the question a little bit to hopefully give you something meaningful in response. So my observation of people like that there's some commonality that I found on them. Most of them, if not all, are just committed to lifelong learning. You know, they understand that rigidity in their thinking is, poison. It's bad. And so they're willing to continuously invest in their own education. And I don't mean formally. I mean, they can be formally for some. It can be informally. It's just curiosity would be another word to use for it. They're always tinkering. They're always looking. They're always, on the edge, on the fringe, seeing what they can learn more, right? If I think once you stop that, then you've stopped your evolution. And it doesn't necessarily mean not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that you're going to probably start pivoting from growth mode to obsolescence mode. If you want to talk about transformation theory and Dr. George Land's work. And so that should be like a warning to you if you recognize that you stop that appetite for learning. Another one, that they do is they look at and they value their time more than anything. That's a big one that I've noticed, and that's something in myself I've even developed over the years. I will find myself engaged on something, and even randomly, it drives my wife crazy, and I will just abruptly stop, disengage, and walk away and go do something else. And she, like, what's going on? Like, I just realized, like, this is a time suck. I catch myself saying, whatever I'm doing at that moment, does this advance my goals, my life goals, my work goals, my business goals, my husband goals, my parent goals, my manager goals? Like, if I can't answer that kind of a question, then I shouldn't be doing whatever it is I'm doing. And that requires a certain discipline, and I recognize that in other people. I had a lunch just the other day with an entrepreneur. He's a great guy. He's sold 3 companies. He's working on his 4th right now. They're already up to $100 million, and I think they're like 2.5 years in the marketplace.
Wow.
And I'm like, how are you doing this? And he said, his actual answer was funnier. He said, well, I'm lazy. I don't like working hard. I want to work smart. And so before he tackles a task, he triangulates, say, okay, what would be the most leveraged way to do this? And I'll give you one of the examples he gave me. He's looking at hiring manufacturers reps right now. And that's typically something that in the traditional model, you have to, hey, please apply. We'll interview. You'll tell me how much money I have to give you to take this job, to sell my product, blah, 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 blah. He went out on LinkedIn, set up a group, said he's doing a survey, and he's taking applications from people who may be worthy enough to represent his product line. And he's almost turning it into a franchise model as opposed to a manufacturer's rep model. And I just sat there and I thought, that was brilliant. And he's got over 200 applications now, where he was, kind of data mining and lucky if he found 2 dozen.
Ownership, right?
Yeah, exactly. These are the traits that I observe in others and I respect in others, and I try to emulate that. Because you win or lose kind of on the fringes. We talked about this earlier. If you look at how you spend your day, showing up is such a big part of whether you fail or succeed. My partner Gary and I, every Saturday is our work on the business day. So Monday through Friday we work in the business. Saturday we reserve for working on the business. And we do that pretty much without fail. Every Saturday, and we put 6-ish hours a day. That accumulates, right? And that's what we're doing that our competitors aren't doing. And that's what we're doing that makes our product better and our service better, and our clients want to partner with us as opposed to just being a client. This, in whatever industry you're doing, that adds up. Those increments add up, and that's a big difference in whether or not you hit your goals.
You're a great teacher, and
that
now I'm pretty clear why you do what you do. But for those who aren't familiar, tell them because all the resources are there, right? What's Ellie doing? And then you got a lot of stuff on your own that you've got going on.
So the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, we are a curriculum company, an education company first and foremost. And really how we are differentiated is that we start with the premise of an entrepreneurial mindset, as the underlying foundation to any kind of education that goes above. So our program is not, and our curriculum offerings are not, a program for the business college or even anybody that's doing an entrepreneurship major. It's really gen ed. We're producing entrepreneurial education as general education because it's a mindset that everybody needs to survive, today in this dynamically changing world. So first and foremost, what Eli does, we are now on 5 continents with the product. It was the initial MVP. I was at the Kauffman Foundation and helped launch that. And then, it's like the entrepreneur, the guy that with the shavers, right? The razors, who said, I love the company so much, I bought it. In this case, I love the company so much, I joined it. And now we're taking this even exponentially faster, and that's great. I'm also doing some publishing in the space, in the ecosystem space, publisher of an online magazine called ID8 Nation. That's id8nation.com. That really was another product that was to address, if I'm being candid, the shortcomings of policymakers. There's so much debate and energy and argument around what to do to make the business climate better, and the R's versus the D's debate, the red versus blue. When in fact all the research shows that most of it, R or D, is just, it's burdensome. It's getting in the way. And Brookings and other organizations that are forward thinking, that are tracking the MSA types of trends and statistics, have found that kind of independently organizing ecosystems that are happening in communities around the country are really what's driving from the bottom up kind of economic development reform. And that's been another space that I've lived in for years and years, and I believe in that, and I want to help empower that, which is why we're publishing ID8. And then, as a periphery, and because I am an entrepreneur and I don't want to pass on a good opportunity, activities for both ID8 and the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative have offered up private consulting opportunities around economic development. So I founded a little private practice called ECDev Partners, where we're providing, very discrete engagement types of things, like maybe advising on, an establishment of an enterprise zone, or an incubator or accelerator, or some kind of community action plan.
There you have it. You're not working 6 hours a day, right? You're working 6 hours maybe on a Saturday, but you're not working 6 hours a day. Tom, thank you.
I don't
very
work
much.
at all, Mo.
I know.
When you love what you do, you don't work an hour a day.
I really not only appreciate what you're doing, but I know that it's at the infancy, and there is a lot more to come with that. You proved it with your past. I know that that's where it's heading in the future. So hopefully much more to come.
Thank you.